My name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today, via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guests Kristin Parker and Emily Bibb from the Boston Public Library. Kristin serves as a lead curator of the arts, and Emily is the curator of prints and drawings. Together, they've helped create Revolution 250 Years of Art and Activism in Boston, a major exhibition marking the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Featuring more than 100 artworks from the Boston Public Library's special collections, the show explores how art and activism have helped shape Boston's identity and how the ideas of liberty and justice continue to evolve. During the program, we'll find out why and how the exhibition came about. We'll go on a behind the scenes tour and in the process come to better understand and appreciate how art, protest, and the pursuit of justice have helped shape Boston's identity for more than 2 centuries. Let's start by meeting Kristin and Emily and then finding all about Revolution, 250 years of art and activism in Boston. Welcome. So delighted you're both able to be here.
Thank you for having us.
I had the wonderful opportunity a week or so ago to visit the exhibition. And first of all, just congratulations on what a blockbuster exhibition it is. It was definitely the testimony of the huge crowd that I had no idea was going to be there when I had the wonderful opportunity. I know it's going to be ongoing into April of the upcoming year. So looking forward to going back and learning even more. Before we hear about it today and have you inform viewers, I think it would be of interest if each of you just very briefly share perhaps a little bit more about your background, professional interests, current position. Kristin, would you start, please?
Sure. Well, I'm Kristin Parker, lead curator of the arts at BPL. I've been at Boston Public Library since 2019. I often tell people I used to skip school as a little girl and come here. So I'm very, very, very grateful to be working here in a public library. I have a museum background in anthropology and have worked in museums my whole career. And this is sort of the best of both worlds, a micro museum that belongs to the people of Boston in a public library.
Fabulous, fabulous. Emily, welcome. A few words about yourself, please.
Thank you. I'm the curator of prints and drawings here for almost 2 years now at BPL. And before that, like Kristin, I have a career background mostly in museums, so particularly fine art museums, but also some time in historical societies. So it's been great to get to know this wonderful big collection over the past couple years, especially through the lens of this exhibition.
Kristin, speaking of the exhibition, what was the initial spark for it? How did it come about and then evolve to what it is today?
Yeah, well, we were invited to participate in the city's 250th anniversary celebrations of the Revolutionary War. So there are a lot of programs are taking place at institutions throughout the city, throughout New England. And the director of special collections asked if we'd be up for hosting an exhibition. We haven't had an exhibition at the library for more than 8 years. We haven't had an art exhibition for more than a decade. So it was a lot to consider. Emily had just arrived. We had just really built the team. And when you are confronted with over 1 million works of art, where do you begin? So we really had to come up with some organizing themes to help us delve into the collection. It wasn't a matter of going into the database and just typing in revolution, which we did do, but that's not how you're going to get the full story that you're after. So we definitely had to come up with some organizing themes.
Emily, how did the concept of exploring both art and activism evolve once you know you were going to assemble this type of exhibition?
So From a lot of different angles, really. So, as Kristin said, we just have a huge collection. So, we're looking to really to pull together some themes and also to make this really relevant to people who are part of our community today. There's a lot of people who are like, "Oh, history, it's dry, it's boring. I learned that in fourth grade." But so we really wanted to bring people in, make it really relevant to stuff that's going on in their life. And there's so many wonderful stories in our collections that we can pull from just because we have such an immense variety of material so that you can tell both that historical stuff. So there's, the sort of expected things there. There's George Washington, there's Paul Revere, but then you can also look into how that sort of revolutionary spirit got carried forward throughout history and into the modern day.
Kristin, for those who haven't had the opportunity to visit yet, would you please give an overview of how it's organized, the different thematic sections, and why you thought that structure is important?
Yeah, so we wanted to, we know that people want to see the hits. We know that when people think about the revolution, as Emily said, they think about George Washington, Paul Revere, Ben Franklin. So we began to think about making history. How do we remember the narrative? And we also kind of turn that on the head. We talk a little bit about the changing narratives over time. And then we began to think about, we knew we couldn't talk about every revolution in history, but we're thinking about the revolutionary spirit. So we wanted to nod towards an age of revolution and how the American Revolution inspired other revolutions throughout history, namely the French Revolution, Haitian Revolution. There's so many more that we could talk about. We know we can't tell all the stories, but these are really strong moments and milestones in the world. And then talking about a revolution, the way that different individuals, some known, some less known, came together and worked together in an intersectional way. So for the original revolutionaries, of course, we moved into who was left out of that original narrative, who was left out of the Declaration of Independence, and how does revolution carry on to meet the needs, the true needs of our people. So we moved towards abolitionism and women's rights, and that the intersections between people who talked about revolution and many layers of and what that means. Then we have to nod to the library, free to all. The spirit of the creation of the Boston Public Library and creating a resource to have an educated public was a radical idea at the time. We're the oldest large municipal library in the nation, and this was created at the beginning of the revolution, or like sort of at the ending of the revolution, and considering what our community needed in order to fulfill the needs of our society by educating our public and giving free resources. And then we move on to All Together Now, people working together to enact change. We have a lot of materials, photographs, and drawings that illustrate how people came together through different social movements to enact change that are lasting today. And finally, we end the exhibition with Another World is Possible. And this really is a nod, even though there's contemporary art throughout the exhibition. This is a suite of works by living artists that are from the Boston area or are connected to Boston in some way, and talking about the role of artists and how they contend with or grapple with the world around us and the social issues of our time.
Emily, can you pick up on what Kristin outlined and share how the exhibition sort of guiding question went about in the selection of the works? To whom were these promises made?
Sure. So a lot of these decisions were obviously very sort of pragmatic, right? So we're building this from our own collections in-house. So we sort of have to look at what we have and say, okay, what story can we really tell and really sort of give the evidence towards? And we did also make some targeted acquisitions for this exhibition, which was great because it allowed us to tell more stories and to fill some gaps that we had in our collection. But like Kristin said, we were really looking at sort of who got left out from that original sort of narrative that got made. There's a lot of people that were not under the protection of the law that couldn't vote or couldn't own property in those early revolutionary days. And so then there's still this revolutionary promise of, freedom for all, justice for all. So we really wanted to look at how that developed and how people organized and came together to broaden, those rights, so that they really were available to more and more people as time went on.
Now, you've done such a wonderful example of contrasting old masterpieces, like you mentioned, Kristin and Emily, the hits that people want to see, like Paul Revere's Bloody Massacre, with that question that you were just expanding upon, Emily, on who was left out. So could you share the thinking, Kristin, of how you're going to showcase Paul Revere's piece with, say, another one here by Bob Tomilillo, and what is the point trying to be made on who's being left out of the discussion of the revolution?
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over quickly to Emily because this is in her world of printmaking. But I will share that this etching that you see right now by Bob Tomilillo is a local Boston printmaker, master printer, was one of the first acquisitions that we made. It was actually a donation when I first arrived at the library in 2019 or a little bit after that. And I just want to describe it a little bit. He worked to establish a printmaking studio at Artists for Humanity. So these are students, great program for budding artists, and they came up with an idea they call it the reboot project, to look back at history and see, like, how would you interpret that today? And in this case, they said, hang on a second, Crispus Attucks isn't featured in the original Paul Revere narrative. We're not really sure where he is, and Emily can speak to that a little bit more. And so they put him front and center, and that project really kind of catalyzed, and actually it was a real catalyzing object for the creation of this show, because again, we really want to illustrate how we're continuing to interrogate the original narrative that we're all taught, and look at it through different layers. But I'm going to turn it over to Emily to expand on this idea too.
Please.
Sure. So our Paul Revere engraving is a later reprint. So the original ones that were sold in 1770 would have been hand colored, and they're really like bright colors, like primary colors, which you can see this one doesn't have. But even without those colors, if you look closely at the Bostonians who are over on the left side of the scene, you'll notice very quickly that everybody is sort of in nice clothing. None of them are carrying weapons. No, they're very, very like staid, middle class gentlemen. And so it's very clear when you analyze this image that Paul Revere is really trying to make a point. This is propaganda sort of at its barest form.
That's for
And
sure.
and people knew that sort of from the moment it was published. He had a viewpoint. He was a patriot. He's really set on, the British are lined up here like a firing squad. It's very, very biased image. And even at the contemporary accounts that were published in print, they knew that this was sort of not the whole and real and true story, but it's what people think of because it was the first image that was printed of this event, and it was very, very widely distributed. So it's the thing that comes to everybody's mind when they think of the Boston Massacre. And so, like you say, if you look at this, even the ones that are colored, there's nobody that you're like, oh, that's a Black man who was shot.
Right.
I've seen some discussion of, there's a couple where there's maybe somebody with darker skin tone, but it varies widely, and the vast majority, it looks like everybody who died was middle class and white, whereas all of the accounts say that this was a group of working class men of different races who went and really provoked the soldiers into firing.
Nice.
And so, like, when you have, even in the trial of the British soldier by John Adams, he's the defense lawyer for the soldiers, and he's using very, very strong language, calling, the Bostonians a rabble, a mob, he's using every epithet he can to sort of, turn the jury and get his clients acquitted. And so that's sort of, those conflicting pulls are sort of what's in our historical memory. But this image really does stick with people.
Oh, for
Um,
sure.
and so then, over the years, there are Massacre Day celebrations, but it's really not really discussed as much that Crispus Attucks, who was the first person to be shot and the first person to be killed, was a Black man, doesn't really sort of bubble back to the surface until the 1850s, when a Boston abolitionist, Black historian and journalist, William Cooper Nell, starts publishing articles and a book about contributions of Blacks during the Revolutionary War. And he begins to really push for this recognition of Crispus Attucks as a patriot and a martyr, and almost sort of like a military hero, even though this was not an organized military action. Nell is the first one to have a celebration of Crispus Attucks, which he holds at Faneuil Hall. He's the first one to start petitioning for a memorial on the Common for Crispus Attucks and the other victims of the Boston Massacre. And eventually this just sort of bubbles up, and the timing, that's the 1850s, right? So this timing really links in with the abolitionist movement, which then builds into as the Civil War is declared. And so as the Civil War is being declared, Nell is also being an advocate for the inclusion of Black troops to fight for the Union. And so in one of the other prints of the massacre that's later on in the show, that's the larger lithograph, even more than this print by Bob Tomalillo, Crispus Attucks is right in the center. I mean, he is absolutely the focus of that image. And it sort of balances off in other directions against the Revere in other ways. So, Crispus Attucks is holding a club. The other Bostonians are holding rocks and clubs, and there's, people. It's very chaotic. But right in the middle of that is Crispus Attucks, and it's definitely like his martyrdom moment. So again, it's like the Revere print. It's definitely propaganda. They printed this with a purpose. They're making the argument that this man was a hero and a martyr and a patriot, and therefore that's their argument, and therefore there should be an abolition of slavery, and therefore Blacks should have full rights in America, and therefore Blacks should be able to serve in the military, and all of those things are tied together, and then it wraps back around. And so if you look closely, the figure of Crispus Attucks that Bob is using in this print is actually very similar to the way he's posed in that larger lithograph. So it's always interesting to me in art in general, and print specifically, because that's my specialty, is how these things are layered off of each other, and they build on each other, and they repeat each other and rhyme.
Terrific, terrific. And for the sake of time, do want to just briefly mention this captivating piece talking about different perspectives from the revolution, of confronting that as a visitor and looking right into the barrels of the rifles. This piece by Larry Rivers is another wonderful addition, just offering a different vantage point. But for the sake of time, as I mentioned, want to move to show another incredible example throughout the exhibition of balancing masterpiece from the past with a contemporary interpretation. Kristin, can you first build on that and tell us about this piece here, Washington at Dorchester Heights, and the intention of including it and the contrast that we're going to shortly see?
Well, George Washington at Dorchester Heights is a monumental painting. It towers over visitors to the library. It's been in what's called the Washington Room since the 1955. It was purchased for the library with the support of Boston public school children who raised funds to keep this painting in Boston. And it was created by Emanuel Lutz in 1852. It is depicting a milestone moment in the Revolutionary War when George Washington, with the idea of bookseller Henry Knox, came up with the idea to bring these ginormous cannons from Fort Ticonderoga. I can never pronounce it. But to bring these cannons from New York to Boston in the dead of winter to intimidate the British. So they managed to bring these to the top of Dorchester Heights overlooking the bay, and the British were so intimidated by this technology that not a single shot was fired. So it became this like really, really important moment in the history of the Revolutionary War. And of course, in this painting, George is a total hero. He's wearing, his uniform. He's very stoic. He's got his fist on the cannon. And we just had this conserved, actually. It's a really wonderful time to see it. It was a real moment for us. It was very challenging to move this thing. It has its original American frames, which weighs about 300 pounds. We had to move that through the library to get it into the exhibition hall. So that was a whole other project for us. And you had to make sure it would fit in the exhibition hall to make sure we could include it. So knowing that we could include it, we could build around it. But it was conserved recently. And so you can see details in him in a way that we've never been able to see before, including the militiamen, like the Green Mountain Boys from Vermont in the far back there, and some extra cannons. And then those details, the tools and the camouflage that they use to install these weapons. So it's really art historically a very important piece. It has a companion piece, Washington crossing the Delaware at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it's also a painting that has caused our visitors and our fellow librarians some question. He's a heroic figure, yes, and he was an enslaver. So that actually became a question for us before we even planned this show. Like, how do we interpret this painting? How do we meet the questions of our visitors and users and things like that? How do we interpret, reinterpret, interrogate these histories? Is he really a hero? He is, of course, a hero in many ways. And the other fact was, and it really draws back to that idea that, we were fighting for freedom for whom? He owned slaves. So we don't want to turn away from that. So that's a question. I hope that when people come into this exhibition, they are catalyzed to think about these things. There's never one sole way of looking at history. There are many, many, many different people involved and different things that are happening and different experiences. Everybody brings their own experience to looking at this particular painting, and that's really important. We can move on to,
just going to say the wonderful contrast, bringing it to modern day, the incredibly talented artist Michael Thorpe and his quilt. Could you share the contrast with the painting we just saw and just with the overall impetus of the exhibition, I would say, as far as different perspectives throughout history?
Well, when we've been thinking about Washington and his placement back into the Washington room at the end of this, and even before we knew we were going to do the show, there's a big blank wall across from him in the Washington room. And we thought, maybe something should speak to him or confront him or talk to him, and what would that be? And so we've been talking to a lot of different artists, and Michael Thorpe came to us. I can't even remember now how we found him, but he just was, we really I'm really interested. We don't have anything like textile in the collection. It's quite unusual. And we invited him in to just respond. We work with a lot of artists. We just have them kind of come through and get to know us a little bit and see if there's some synergy there. And we invited him to come and take a look. And, I thought, like, what do you think? What do you think of the collection? What do you think of this stuff? What do you, and he does a lot of work. He's beginning to look at historical documents and quilting on top of images, reproductions of those and things like that. And he was thinking about looking at the Declaration of Independence, and then he saw Washington. He's like, no, I'm going to do a portrait of Washington. And he is biracial. His mother is white, and he learned quilting from her. She comes from that traditional New England background of quilting, and he became really interested in the African-American tradition of quilt making. And he's a basketball player, and he's an artist. He's been a photographer, but he's really kind of finding his he's striving in this world of textile now.
Hmm.
So they're very painterly quilts, very abstract. He loves Jacob Lawrence, who's also featured in this exhibition. And you can see that in the really graphic illustrations. And what he did here is he created 24, is it 20 or 24 panels
Hmm.
that break the picture plane apart. And his intention is to rotate these panels throughout the duration of the exhibition as a way to um, activate the idea that, again, history is always interpreted and reinterpreted depending on
Right.
who is doing the looking and the talking and the writing. And so I
Yeah, no,
wanted, and this is just luck in terms of the way we didn't know. He didn't see the Washington painting when it wasn't there when he installed. So he installed it with just this image in mind. And then when we installed the Washington, the way that that sight line is, and I really, I can't wait for people to come to the show and see that moment. The way these two works of art speak to each other was
yeah.
really kind of serendipitous, and it's a wow moment for sure.
And then it changes from time to time throughout the exhibition.
That's right. So he'll come back and do some programming with us and rotate the panels.
Wonderful, wonderful. Uh, Emily, in closing, with the 250th anniversary of Revolution coming up, what conversations do you hope this exhibition will engender both locally and possibly nationally?
I think that there's, I mean, so many different conversations that are sort of happening in this exhibition space. We're talking about so many different movements and also just so many different ways that so many different people can spark change or encourage change or keep the momentum of change going forward. So I think if people take one thing from it, I'd love it for it to be, you know, there's always sort of this idea of like these big street protests, and that definitely is like a very striking visual. We have some great photos, we have some
Mhm.
great protest signs even in the exhibition, but there's so many different ways that people can make a difference depending on what their skills and interests and abilities are. Sometimes it's making a sign and handing it to your friend who's going to go march. Sometimes it's going and doing the marching. Sometimes it's a letter writing campaign or calling your representatives, forming coalitions of really different types of people, but who have really similar goals. And I think all of those are, conversations that people need to have about how can I be making change? How can I be helping build that world that I really want to see and that we have this revolutionary promise of?
Wonderful, wonderful. Now more than ever, I think those sentiments can be carried forward for sure. In closing, Kristin, how can viewers and others find out more about the exhibition in addition to visiting it?
Yeah, well, we do have a web page on the Boston Public Library's homepage, so you can find us there. There's also what's called a Bloomberg Connects tour,
Yeah,
and that offers the exhibition. It offers descriptive text for every image, and also has label text and things like that, so you can preview that way, or you can tour it that way if you can't make it on site. And we are open until April 21st. Check the hours on the website. So it will be up for a long time, and keep an eye out for programs also posted on the website, because we will be hosting a number of different programs to engage people with the objects in the show.
fabulous, fabulous. Well, can't say enough about it. Look forward to visiting it again soon. Congratulations, and want to wish you both continued success with future endeavors.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for having us.
I want to thank you for watching and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.